Hello and good afternoon. It feels like it's been an age since I've last done one of these, but I must admit I've kind of been quite busy doing a lot of other stuff, which we'll kind of touch on. But the Growth Strategy Podcast is a podcast and live stream that I do on predominantly on LinkedIn, but it goes out on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and lots of different things. One of the things I was very conscious to do, and it started during the first lockdown, was to talk to interesting people that I think will help your business or career, but actually, people I think will add value that, they're actually worth talking to. I'm one of these people that I don't get paid to do this. Nobody pays to come on. It's more just general interest and, speaking to kind of good people. And my guest today, David, is no different. I'm going to go into some of his background. I'm going to talk it through, but David has worked all around the world. Really interesting guy. I've probably known him for about 11 or 12 years, which we're going to go into. He recently launched a book, which I've read, which we're also going to talk about. And hopefully for the next kind of 30, 40 minutes, if you choose to join us, it should be a nice, interesting conversation. And then afterwards, this gets clipped up and goes on to Google and iTunes and all the kind of regular podcast places as well. So David, I'm just going to bring you in. There we go. You're good. You're live and now everyone can see you and hear you.
Good afternoon, Steve. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. How are we doing on the cricket just before we carry on?
Well, we're one down. The Indians got 186, so we're one down so far. But we'll catch them.
So just to explain, so normally I actually do these in the morning. It's quite funny actually with we all have busy lives. I have a day job where I actually do help people grow and run companies and stuff. But when I was talking to David, he was going to go on. David has a really big network, and actually you've got some guests and some friends from America. So we purposely went later in the day. So actually, hopefully people can tune in from the other side of the pond. So that was just to kind of explain to people. But again, I always mention that I always like to talk to people that I feel I know in some way, where there's like an actual relationship where, there's some history kind of there. And I think we first met, I think it was about 10, 12 years ago. I believe it might have been when I was at the LEP, and I believe Kurt Foreman might have been involved, but you never know. We've both been part of NOF or NOF Energy as it used to be for a long time.
I think it's more likely 15 years, but there you go. Time goes by when you're enjoying yourself, or you're retired, one of the two.
True. Are you officially retired now? I've never thought. I know people never retire, but
officially. But I've struggled with the whole idea of being retired, and have been fortunate enough that a number of people have requested that I keep helping them, mentoring them, etc. And in the course of that, the folks in Delaware asked me if I'd act as one of their 2 global advisors, and I was happy enough to do that. So that takes up a bit of time, and I've just gone on from that. I just don't want to turn the switch off. Perhaps that's the way of looking at it.
But I must admit, you probably never will, because likewise, I imagine you do this because you enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the issue, is that it is enjoyable to do, and it gives me a buzz, and I hope it gives the people I help a buzz. And so therefore, why would you turn it off? Doesn't seem to be any point in doing that.
Yeah, that's cool.
And as long as it doesn't interrupt the golf too much, then we're fine.
What's your handicap, by the way?
I'm not discussing that live on air. There are too many people listening who think they might be able to take a few bob off me. So I'm not discussing.
So when you're going for the golf competitions, do you put yourself down as 27 and then just...
No, you're not allowed to do that, unfortunately. I wish, but no.
Fair enough. So again, the other thing which I'll just kind of mention now is that I have a very different audience of people at different ages and different parts of their career. You've got people that, ironically, to me, they're younger. To you, they're your grandchildren's age. But likewise, you have different... What I was going to almost try and get across is that one of the best things that I ever did almost in my career is almost to... it's to learn from different people and actually pick up the different snippets. And that's what David's book's all about, which I'll touch on. But actually, there is a lot of knowledge out there from people that have been there and done it, and actually just, had a real life that people can kind of learn from. And again, part of this conversation, I think, will add value to that. That it's always trying to help people share their story and a lot of the stuff. And then it was quite funny, actually. I had a call at 10 to 11 today, and it was people were asking me, I know I get paid to do it as a job, but almost my brains on that. And it's funny that I think, actually, just to pick your brains, when you went through your career, and we'll go into the details soon, you always feel like you're still learning, but it's other people that seem to then see you as the person that knows what you're talking about. Did you ever find that?
Yes, and I think that one thing I would say to everybody is every day's a school day. Wake up every day and assume you're going to learn something today. Don't always look to be learning something. But it's interesting is that since I've been less charging around the world and had more time to contemplate some of the things I've done in the past, that some of the age of the people who I mentor has come down. So whereas in the past it tended to be people at my age, and some in cases, I was in my 40s and 50s, a little older than me. As I've reached my 70s, mid 70s, the age of the people who I help from a mentor point of view has tended to come down. So there are people in their 20s and 30s now. And I think part of the reason why is that as you reach that venerable age, people in that age group do, if they realize you come well recommended, they do realize you bring a wealth of experience. And the old adage of, bought the t-shirt, etc. But that becomes true. And so therefore people look at you and go, I know I can ask that person this question because there'll be somewhere in that experience that will be able to help me.
Yeah, because I must say, again, on the call I had this morning, we were talking about intellectual property rights and that kind of thing. But what was interesting is that just throughout my own career, I could pick on like 6 or 7 different times when we'd done different approaches because I've been there and done it, and it's
to the same solution.
And it's just, I think you often find that when, and rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, as there was always going to be, and it's just actually having an awareness. Who can I speak to about this? And I think it's a really important thing. But anyway, we'll jump into the interview. Would you be happy to tell people a bit about yourself? And just before we go into that, I'm always interested as well in almost like, where you were born, where you grew up, what you were like at school, before we actually just jump into the career stuff. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Where was I born? Oh, well, I grew up in North Essex, which is East Anglia, here in the UK. My father was in the insurance business. My father was in the insurance business in his entire career. As a young man, I wanted to be an actor. In my early teenage years, I did plays and musicals. I was the lead chorister in my local church choir, and by that time, sort of Elvis had happened and music was becoming far more important to teenagers. And I had a crossover between, did I want to be in the music business or did I want to be an actor? My father, who had served in Montgomery's 8th Army and was a typical ex-army officer, decided he didn't want a black sheep in the family, so he tried to find something else that I was interested in order to get me to go to college. And I could play rugby football. My father had played for Saracens in his youth, and so I grew up in a rugby family, and I played rugby at school. And he found a college in Suffolk where the principal was a rugby fanatic and was always looking to recruit good rugby players, kids who could play rugby. And it was an agricultural college. And we lived in a farming community. So most of my friends around me were connected to the agricultural industry in some form or another. 90% of my father's clients were farming folk. And so he managed to convince me to go for the interview. I went, got a place in the college, and went off to play. I went to play rugby football. I didn't really go to learn agriculture, to be honest with you. I went to play this fantastic guy, played rugby twice a week. And unfortunately, in the summer of my first year, I managed to crash my motorcycle and break my neck. And that put a pay to me playing rugby football. So I had to really concentrate on my studies, which I did. And so I left college and went into industry surrounded by the agricultural industry. Ended up working for what is now GlaxoSmithKline for a while, and then got headhunted. This sounds really posh to say this when I was only 21 years old, and was something that didn't happen in those days. But it was one of the chance meetings in a pub. Someone approached me who knew of me, and said, "We're recruiting salespeople." And it was the first time I'd really thought about selling. I'd always realized I could sell myself because I was still interested in amateur dramatics and stuff like that. And so I went and I landed a job with this company who were based in Eindhoven in Holland.
Wow.
Which was a big factor because I was told at the interview, we have a monthly sales meeting for the European salespeople, and it's held in Eindhoven in Holland. I'm 21 years old. You know, we're talking 55 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, ooh, that's exciting. That means I get to get on an aeroplane once a month at least. And I was sold, I was in. And from there, I just developed. I realized very quickly that I was good at closing a deal. Mm-hmm. I could, and I worked out by the time I was 25 that it wasn't just the sale. I seemed to be quite good at convincing other people of either my idea or somebody else's idea. I could sell other people's ideas to other people as well as products. And then when an opportunity came to leave the agricultural industry and branch out into industry, I took the chance, and the rest, as I say, is history. And from then on, it became a fairly eclectic career. I'd always wanted. I think I reached 35 to 40, and wanted to work for myself. I had an ego, and still do, I freely admit, have a fairly large ego.
Everyone does.
I believe, sorry?
Everyone does.
Yeah, and I believe that I could do it for myself. But it took me a good few years to find something which was really sustainable and which turned out to be very successful. Mm-hmm. I had a couple of attempts at it, spectacularly bust in one occasion, but not for a fortune, but just spectacularly from my perspective, like, oh, this hasn't worked. I was very lucky in that because of my track record, I could fall back onto corporate roles.
Yep.
I ended up working in Canada, in Toronto, in the outskirts of Toronto, for a really good company. And whilst I was working for that organization, I really made a commitment to myself to try and find a vehicle for my talents and the talents of others. And in the late 80s, that's when I came up with the idea for Pathfinder Team Consulting. And by 1990, we were up and running in France. We were living in France then. And off we went. I'd built a career around understanding how to translate ideas into something that somebody else will believe. So it all worked back in the 70s in the Middle East. Although the organization I was working for was involved in the construction industry, it was about selling concepts to clients, and selling concepts to clients whose first language wasn't English. And so that was a real challenge. It became something I realized I could do better than some other people. And so I ended up doing lots of presentational stuff because other people who had all the bright ideas
didn't want to do it.
Couldn't get that idea across to other people.
Yeah. Well, I think it's quite interesting because I didn't know you had the background, or at least the ambition about being an actor and presenting. And because, like, I guess we'll touch on it, but it's almost where, you know, how much of sales and like there's all things that people want to see, and they want to see that you're articulate and enthusiastic and passionate and stuff. And again, some people just don't have that. And I think in some ways that what were you like at school? Were you straight A's or kind of middle of the road or a bit naughty?
Never straight A's. I'm not academic. I really am not academic. I think somewhere on my LinkedIn profile it says I went to the University of Life.
Yeah.
I'm not a student.
But this is almost where you...
But I'm a student. What I became or have become is a student of watching other people.
Yeah. But what I meant is that...
how other people perform.
But you obviously recognized where you did have talents and strengths, and actually just knowing to kind of go hard on that as opposed to other things. And I think sometimes people, they don't recognize their own, what they're good at and what they're not good at. And therefore they might try and chase something. Like I can't sing at all. I'm atrocious. So I think it's the thing I'm officially worst at is singing. But anyway, but I know that if I tried to pursue a career in music, I would struggle. And it's that kind of thing of just knowing what you're good at. And I think almost with age, sometimes but again, you find things that you're passionate about.
Yes, I think coming back to your point about the talent pool, I can probably explain that better with talking about the consulting business, which we started back in 89, 90. And it was best described by somebody who I know is listening on this call today. So I'll be very careful by not naming them. But a gentleman who worked for a major US leisure corporation described Pathfinder team consulting like this. He said, what you expect mostly from consulting practices is that the B team sell you the job, right? So the A team sell you the job,
And they pass
the
it on
B
to...
team, which is the young MBA students, pitch up to do the consulting work. He said the difference with Pathfinder team consulting is that the B team, Smallman, shows up and pitches it to you, you buy it, and then he sends in the A team.
Yeah.
And within Pathfinder team consulting, every single one of those consultants who worked for Pathfinder team consulting was far more academically qualified than I was.
Yeah, okay.
But what I brought to the team was that ability to translate their really good ideas and their good advice into something which the client could buy into because he understood it.
Christina Marconi says, hi, David. And great to hear Steve and David talk about leaning on your strengths. But it's great to see that people are watching. And Simon, as always, thank you. But the thing, this is why it's interesting just to, because you learn this over time. I am quite lucky that I was born and raised in Liverpool, so you kind of have to get good enough at blagging stuff and stealing things and getting away to kind of make your way through. But I also happen to be quite good at the other stuff as well. And it's just, but you find your niche and you find out what you're particularly good at, and then you just work with other good people and stuff. And no, I completely agree. So then fast forward through to today. I guess because you worked in 63 different countries?
64.
64. And before I go on, so like what was that experience like? I'm just trying to go up and then, yeah. So
lots of air miles, lots and lots of air miles, which was always fun. I've been very lucky. I've had clients who have prepared to allow me not to have to sit in the back of the bus too often, which is always helpful when you're doing a lot of traveling. I think it was going back, if I may, go back to the Eindhoven days, landing that job triggered in me a travel bug. It was like, oh, there's different cultures out here. There are different people out here. And I realized very quickly, coming back to the communication thing, I could communicate with these people.
Yeah.
Right. And that drove I don't mind where I go. I don't mind where you're from. Where are we going next week then? Egypt? What are we going to Egypt for? Well, we're going to do a housing project and we need to convince the Ministry of Housing to use this modular system. Oh, really? So what you're really saying is you want me to go and pitch to the Ministry of Housing in Egypt? Yes, please. Oh, okay, fine. And that was, you learned those skills and then they became transferable.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to build a steel township in Nigeria. Right, they got a Russian company who were prepared to build the steel plant, but they needed a township around it so they could house everybody who wanted to work in it. Mm-hmm. How are we going to do that? Well, some guy in southeast London came up with a system of putting in the housing in a hurry, but guess what? He needed somebody to go and convince the Russians and the Nigerians that this was a good idea.
Okay.
It's just a different thing, you know.
No, cool. Where's the favorite place you've ever been?
Oh, what a question. To be fair, I've heard that question before, Steve, and I usually give the same answer. So I'll stick with the tried and tested. I loved Qatar in the Middle East. I think it's an amazing little country. I was fortunate enough to become quite friendly with some of the people who were in power there back in the 70s and 80s. And the one thing that interests me about Qatar is the sun shines 350 days a year out of 365. it very rarely falls below about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, if ever.
Yeah.
And they have underneath their feet enough gas to last for 250 years. They're never going to run out of money. So it's a really interesting place. It's socially aware and the sunshine. So
I think they've sent me some of the sunshine now. I'm getting blind.
As someone once said to me, well, if someone gave you first class airline ticket and told you you can't come home, where would you go? And there are lots of places. I mean, there are places in the US I love dearly, New Orleans and Florida and places, as well as places in the Northeast. I enjoyed Argentina immensely. There were parts of going to the Philippines which were awesome. I've been a fan of Spain for many years, probably because of the golf. But if someone said to me, "You can't come home, you're stuck forever," I think I'd go to Qatar. I'd still go to Qatar.
So, do you mind if we jump onto the book, because then we've got a lot of content to kind of talk about?
Please do.
So, I'd sort of this, and I've read it. I read it over 2 weekends, but I must admit it's quite a quick read in a good way, and we'll touch on it. Would you like to pitch it, tell people about what it is, how it came about, that kind of thing?
I'll be happy to. Yeah, it's a handbook. It's supposed to be a reference handbook. It's not academic. It's not full of long words and difficult phrases to understand. It's a book of 55 small vinaigrette stories about things that have happened to me in my life, or business situations I've been involved in, or ideas. One of the things my career has taught me is I've been able to spot the management ideas that don't work and avoid them like the plague. And so I know some of the good ones that do work, and a lot of those stories in the book are about best practice. Do it like this, it works. This is the reason why it works. Some of the stories are about people's dreams and ambitions. You know, one of the stories uses the title from a famous Journey song, which is "Don't Stop Believing," which is one of my favorite tracks of all time. And never, I mean, one of the things from my career you can take, I never stopped believing for 1 minute that I would be successful at what I did. I had my ups and downs, and some of them were really horrible downs, but I always believed I would be successful. And don't ever stop that dream. So when somebody suggested about 2009, 2010, a friend of mine in New Orleans, we were sitting around on a Sunday afternoon on the patio with a couple of beers, and after a game of golf, of course, and he said, "You need to write a handbook. You've got all these ideas, and you know, oh yeah, sure, I'll get around to it one day, Joe." And every year I would say, "I'm going to do the book." And then I ended up at a radio show called Smallman Making Sense of Business. And every Christmas, on the Christmas show, I would go, "And next year, folks, I will write the book." But of course, I never did. Right? And then during last year, during one of the lockdowns, a friend of mine in Toronto, Tom Kelly, a very dear friend of mine who I've done a lot of work with in the latter years of Pathfinding Consulting, we did a lot of work together, said, "Look, why don't you write a book?" "Oh, I'm not sure I want to do it." No, he said, "If you write the book," he said, "I'll help you by editing it." Which is a bit strange, you know, why would you have a Scotsman living in Toronto editing an Englishman's words? But hey, you know, it's worked, so that's good news. And the two halves of the book are the stories and then some quotes or little sayings. And the quotes and little sayings definitely came out of the radio show. The second week of having my own show, at the end of the show, we had a really interesting person to interview. Can't remember who it was now, sorry. But we had a very interesting interview towards the end of the show. And I closed the show by using a one-liner that was in my head. And when we went off air, the producer, Georgia Gibson, said, "Have you got any more of those?" And I went, "Yeah, why?" She said, "You need to finish every show with one of those." And I went, "Okay, fine." I have a little brown book, which I know you've seen because I've showed it to you. I have a little brown book, which I carry about with me everywhere. And when we came around to editing the book, I realized I had over 140 of these sayings. So we trimmed it down to 110. because there's 55 stories and 110 of the little one-liners or one paragraphs, if you like. I like balance in life. 55, double 55 is 110. I know it's very nerdy, but I like balance like that. And so we just put it together on that basis. And we started, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what impressed me was that, tell people when you started it and then in theory when it went to print. This is what impressed me the most. Thomas and I finally agreed at the end of September last year that we would do it. I would do it. It took me a couple of weeks before I sort of got into gear, and Thomas nudged me and said, well, hello, are we doing this sort of thing? Yes, okay, we'll do it. So we formally started the process. I guess the first email with text on it from me to him saying, please look at this, was the last week of September. And we went live with the book on the 14th of February. Yeah, that's crazy fast. Having been someone that's just been through this process, I know how long it takes. And, but I was really impressed. And it's just, and genuinely as someone that has now read it, because again, me and David talked about, maybe coming on a while back, but actually when I found the book was coming, I had a lot of stuff to kind of get sorted myself, ordered it, read it, loved it, and then we kind of set it up. So what we thought would be quite interesting is that I've picked out 12 different sections. We might not do all 12, but we might do. And actually it was to almost, what was interesting when I spoke to David about before we kind of started was that different people are going to take different things from the book and what's relevant to you. And I've almost found this, that at different points in your career, different things are relevant. So I might reread this in a few years' time and pick up on different things. But what I've done with my sticky tabs at the top, picked out 12. And then what I thought would be interesting is that I'll like tee it up. And then if you want to talk about it, but I'm conscious we've got a few to go through, so we'll keep it quite short. Is that cool? Is that a good idea?
Yeah. So, but one of the things which JR said to me when we started, when he came up with the idea was, this is something people, you need to write this so people put it on their desk or in their briefcase. This is not a book to be read cover to cover at a sitting.
I read it cover to cover in 2 sittings, but only because of the interview.
But after that, it's a book for you to dib in and out of.
It's a book for the toilet, as you told me on the phone.
Yes. No, that wasn't me. It was somebody else. Somebody has said that they think this is the best business executive blue book they've ever read.
I think that's a good chat. But likewise, with anything, you always want to try and find your niche. I think that's a great thing. I would actually put that on the back of the book. It's perfect. Anyway, so I'm going to go through them. I'll tee it up and then likewise. So the first one, which was number 18, which I've got, was that basically it is too easy to communicate, with the meaning being that people have got lazy in how they communicate. Do you want to jump and expand on that one?
Yes, that story came out of, as they all do, out of a real life situation. I realized that somebody had written to me an email, and the email had Dear David, the letter had Dear David at the top, right? And then was clearly a
standard
cut and paste.
Yeah.
Right? And was not actually addressed to me. It was probably addressed to 30,000 people. That's okay, fine. Until I realized that in actual fact, it was addressed to me, but they hadn't taken the bother or the time to edit it so it was relevant to me rather than being personalized to me, if you like. So that got me thinking about the whole communication thing.
But I think it's true. I think you get too many people that are lazy. But it's one of the things that when I was setting up the roadmap, which I know you've had and whatever, I wanted to personally hand sign every single one. So it's legit. It's not just because the printing company I used did offer to do all the distribution, and I didn't want to do that. And so I agree with you 100% that that personal touch is worth £1 million versus, the worst one is actually on email when you get dear first name and it's a mail merge that's gone wrong.
Yes.
It's atrocious.
Yeah. And I think that the email is the big culprit. And I know you talk about that in the roadmap thing, but email is the big culprit. It is so easy to hit reply and just type what's in. And I say to funny enough, I had to say it to one of my children only a couple of days ago. Whoa, just take 20 minutes before you reply. right? And think, should it be an email?
Yeah, pick up the phone.
Should you pick up the phone? Or should you be really old-fashioned and actually write them a letter and put a stamp on the envelope? Because some things, for some people, are that important or that meaningful that the letter in the mailbox is going to have a real impact on them.
Yeah.
So it is too easy to communicate. And another bugbear of mine while we're on the too easy to communicate is I hate these phone systems where when you ring the main number for an organization, it gives you, and I'm not talking about big media companies. I'm talking about, a company with 20 or 30 employees, accountants, a classic example. The phone has answered and it's press 1 for Fred, press 2. If you don't know your extension, please hold and someone will speak to you. And it's always said in a voice which says, well, you're being a real pain because you don't know the extension number. Hang on, folks, we're still live. We're still all here. Let's talk to one another and let's express it by just being at least,
Because what's also interesting on that topic is what you said before, is that when customers work with me, they get me. So you get my mobile number and it goes straight through to me 24 hours a day. There is no other buffer. And I think it's important, but that's almost where it's about the pride in your setup and your service that, it's your reputation. It's everything. Anyway, we've got a lot to go through. The next one was number 19, which was Light My Fire. Do you want to jump on that? The doors. But again, it was all to do with how, people need to sense and feel your passion and your enthusiasm. Because if they don't, they're not going to buy from you.
No, that was written on a few years ago. I was in Paris with my wife, wedding anniversary, and we stayed in a little hotel on the other side of the Seine, and we ended up going to a restaurant which had been frequented by Jim Morrison. And the whole thing was a Doors memorabilia, and so it was brilliant. The food was excellent, but it was just really neat. Was a Doors fan from way back, and so I really enjoyed that. It was good fun. And the following week, having played Light My Fire and a number of other Doors tracks on Spotify, whilst traveling, I came across a situation in which somebody who I'd known for a long time and had helped their business. I didn't actually work directly with them, but knew their business. I came into my space of what we were talking about and started doing a presentation. And I realized the presentation completely lacked passion. Yeah. It lacked any fire in the belly at all. And having just flown from Paris the week before, and the Doors thing, and listened to the Doors on the plane on the way over, it just clicked with me that, hey, you've got to keep your passion, you've got to keep the fire alive. And if it dies, then if you're a one-man band or a very small business, a very small SME, if that passion or that fire dies in you and it's your business will die.
Yeah. Almost, it's interesting actually. Some of the business owners I work with have said to me in the past that when they've been through tough times, they did lose the passion for it. And luckily they've got it back and they've got the hunger and they've got the excitement, but it's a real kind of thing. I'm going to skip past the next one, but just wanted to prove that it's not all theory. There's actually some practical stuff. It was doing monthly billing. That resonated with me. David asked me before actually why did I pick certain things? But again, that's a practical thing that when you're looking at very hands-on ways to grow a company and turn it around, especially if you're struggling, that's a really big one. Next on the list.
Whilst you're on that subject, there's a video out by a guy called Gary Mumford, who's a really, really good accountant based over in the UK. I think you can pick it up on LinkedIn, and he talks about that very thing, about billing and making sure you collect your money.
Yeah, I agree.
Your money in somebody else's bank account isn't helping your cash flow.
Yeah. Almost we could talk for hours just on cash flow, but it's
absolutely.
My point is the book isn't just theory. There's actually a lot of practical stuff there. Next one, 23 was, are you a passive entrepreneur?
Oof. Yeah, written after yet another frustrating encounter with somebody who had worked for lots of different corporations in the same industry, very good at what they did, constantly talking about doing their own thing, which was aligned to the same industry, talking a great story, really, powerfully. Sit down and have a glass of wine and go over it, and you'd be really, oh yeah, fantastic, George, that's fantastic. That'd be really good. You should have a go at it. I'll tell you what, I'll help you with your business plan. And you sit down, you start putting business plan. You suddenly realise, actually, he's a passive entrepreneur. Yeah. He's never actually, and it happens to be a he's never actually going to bite a bullet.
Yeah, and it's what I always find funny, and that's why I appreciate how much work goes into this, is because the truth is, how many people are full of shit when they talk the talk, but actually, have they been there? Have they done it? Can they prove it? Whatever. Very, very few. But also because of that, I think the good people stick together. They get recognized, and then you see people around. But it resonated with me. Next one, number 25, and I think this is really good actually. Safe or talent?
Never safe. Always hire talent. Always.
Yeah. I was going to say, you have to explain to other people what the concept is.
Okay. The concept of this is, it's very easy when you're hiring people in your organization to hire safe. A lot of HR people will guide their senior directors and their board members towards a safe candidate. Somebody who ticks all the boxes, does all the right things, talks the right talk, and all of that type of thing, right? At the end of the day, the only thing your business needs is talent. It needs proper talent. And don't ever, in a business, pass up talent. Mm. Don't let talent slip through your fingers, because trust me, sometime, somewhere in the future, that piece of talent will come back and give it to you, because somebody else will have harnessed that talent, made it work, and made their business more successful because of it. As always, a lot of very talented people are not the easiest people in the world to manage, right? I mean, in the music business is full. The music business is full of people. The arts are full of people who are difficult to manage. They all, by ordinary mortals, they get called divas or, whatever, right? But at the end of the day, the really true talented person is the person you need in your business, however difficult you think they're going to be to manage. Never safe, always the talent.
I think it's true. And it's one of the things that I always keep a lookout. And it's funny that I think you can recognize talent in seconds. And I remember there's people I've met, and I won't name them, but within like 2 minutes, I could recognize it. And then what I always like to do, and it's probably, obviously you've got more years than I do, you just watch them and you see them move. And it's almost, what always gets me though, is that when you see people that have talent, but seem to get trapped, or they don't believe in themselves and that kind of thing. And that's almost where...
Second one. Yeah. The second one's often the case.
Yeah.
They get trapped simply because they reach a point in their lives with family responsibilities and other things where they feel that they've reached their zenith, and to go, the next step is the dangerous step. Yeah. This is comfortable. There's the 6-figure salary coming in and the nice car on the driveway and the kids are in the right school, but the next step is a big step. And so that's always the danger, or the what stops a lot of talent becoming available. But I agree with you, and you and I both have a mutual acquaintance who it would be very rude of us to mention his name, but we know of somebody who has lived and worked in your part of the world for many years, who you can go back and plot his career. Dumb. Why? Because at the end of the day, he's got talent, and B, at each step, someone's gone, that's the person who can take us to the next step.
Yeah. Cool. Number 28 is, and actually I think this is very, very, very relevant. Starting a partnership, be careful, be very careful.
Yes. Any partnership is the problem with partnerships is that you start a partnership, two of you, sat around having a coffee in Starbucks and thinking, this is the thing, we got the right idea, we're ready to go here, we really like each other, we've both got good talents, we know we can do this. Now you've got a 50-50 partnership. At some point in the future, 90% of those 50-50 partnerships end in tears. Why? Because there's nobody to arbitrate.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. There's only you two. There's nobody to tell you where you've made a mistake, and there's nobody to arbitrate between the two of you when you do have a disagreement.
Yeah.
So one of the things I learned fairly early on, maybe not that early on, I learned this back in the mid-80s.
When you were my age.
Sorry, you'd only just been born. Yes, I realise actually. Back in the mid-80s, from somebody who's a well-known London business and political leader, and who became a member of Pathfinder Team Consulting. In fact, the first member of Pathfinder Team Consulting, and he had this idea, which was, if you have a partnership, what you do is you take 1% of your 50%. And you take 1% of the other party's 50%, and you give those 1% to two separate people, preferably two people who don't know each other. Okay. So somebody you're friends with and somebody they're friends with, right? And those two 1%ers hold the key to the arbitration in your partnership. And how if you have a problem, then, and you can't resolve it because you've got one vote each, right? And you can't resolve it, you go to the two arbitrators and go, please go in a dark room, come out and tell us which one's right. Yeah. And you have to agree within your partnership agreement, you agree that whatever the arbitrators tell you is what you do. And it works. It works like a dream.
I think it's true. I must admit, my personal approach would be, but I would say this, I think you need one decision maker. To just, it has to be their vision and they charge for it. That's my view. But then I don't disagree with that. Yeah, I just think
I don't disagree with that at all.
Because one of the big things is that so when I launched the roadmap, which we'll talk on about later, but it's almost, people always said, oh, you should speak to so-and-so about this, you should speak to the university or whoever. But whenever there's someone that can slow you down or say no or block you, I don't like it. I think part of the reason I'm doing quite well is that you can run as fast as you're comfortable and there's nobody pulling you back. And, a lot of people have different risk profiles and that kind of thing, where a business should be like a lean killing machine kind of athlete that needs to just no waste, just boom, 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 boom. It's where seeds of doubt and decision making and wait until next week's meeting to make a decision, and just in business, I'm not entirely sure democracies work. You can have the democracy, but you still need a decision maker that makes the overall call.
That's true. But one thing a small business is not it's not a democracy. It should not be a democracy.
Yeah.
As you quite rightly say, somebody has to make a decision, and that's where partnerships sometimes have a real problem.
I agree. So next one is number 38, a waste of time. And this one is about basically, do you want to explain it? I'm happy to do it.
No, go on. You're doing really well.
No. So it's any opportunity to increase sales should always be viewed as time well spent, not wasted, which I agree with. In the book, it talks about how and you do get this because I do oil and gas bids for certain clients and stuff. You put time and effort into stuff that's never wasted, because even if you don't win the bid, you're building relationships with the client, you're demonstrating expertise, you're learning about your own cost base and your offer and where you sit in the market. And I think, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole point in the book is that, even time that you think you've lost bidding a contract that you don't win, you'll still learn something, especially if you get the feedback and improve. And it resonated with me, so I put my little tab.
No, it's fine. That story emanates from an engineering business, fabrication business in Scotland, and there's no artistic license in that story. That story is absolutely true.
But it's
and it frightened the life out of me. I couldn't. And what made me write that story, was the reaction of my clients, who absolutely was completely open-mouthed with, why?
Yeah.
Like, why is he react? I mean, the guy in Scotland wrote the snottiest letter you can think of to the potential, like it was, and you think, and my client said, why is he being so rude to me? Circumstances have changed. How can it possibly be a waste of time?
Yeah, I'm with you.
And in this particular case, right, it had cost the guys in Scotland virtually nothing to put the bid together. Nothing. It's not as though they had to jump on a plane, as you and I have done in the past. I've certainly done. You know, I can remember jumping on a plane to Buenos Aires, spending $4,000 on an airfare on the hope that there was a deal at the other end.
Yeah.
Not there was a deal, but the possibility there was a deal.
Which leads as a perfect segue into number 46, opportunity is everywhere. And before you answer that one, Simon Crisp, thank you for watching. He's watching on Twitter via the Periscope app. Look forward to catching up. And again, leave your comments to myself and David. And thank you for watching. So David, yes, opportunity is everywhere, including Buenos Aires.
Yes, yeah. Wherever you are in your business, wherever you think you are, right? There's always an opportunity. There's always people around you who could be the link to the next big job. You know, I don't use this particular example over that in the book, but the whole thing about 6 degrees of separation, you've got no clue when you hook up with somebody what their other half of the, let's assume it's 6 degrees of separation between you and whatever, right? Say, but you and Mr. Johnson, right? There's only 6 degrees of separation. And someone said, well, describe that. I said, well, there's only 5 steps between Steve Pugh talking to Boris Johnson, because somewhere in his contact book is the first step that can lead to the second step, to lead to the third step. And, you know, if you're sat in an airport and someone strikes a conversation with you, think about what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right?
But this is true, just the fact that we've stayed in touch for so long. And actually, there's people I've known from around in our network that I sent the roadmap to, and one of them could be globally life-changing, but it comes from someone that I met 10 years ago. And actually, there's a lady called Jenny Smith that's been a previous guest on the podcast, and she said this one thing, and it kind of blew my mind, but it is true, is that when you meet someone, be it an airport or whenever, you actually meet everyone that person will ever meet and has ever met. Because in the same way that the conversations that we've had, you've thought, actually, this is really useful. This would be useful for that, and that person. And what you're saying is completely true. And that, I think that net is hugely wide, that I think sometimes people are too, and don't get me wrong, on planes, I hate talking to people. I'm not a chatter, headphones on, I read or whatever. You know, some people like to talk. I don't do that. But I agree with what you're saying, actually properly listening. Before we move on, we've had a request from Christina. Would you be happy to talk about failure and like what that means and what you've learned about it?
Yeah, sure. You learn from, you know, obviously the old cliches, you learn from all of your failures. And if you don't learn from them, you know, then frankly, you're a fool. The failures that I've had, one in particular, I started to build a management and marketing consultancy business off the back of one client, always dangerous, and off the back of somebody wanting to fund the startup of that business. So I didn't actually, at the beginning, didn't have to put up my own money, or not a lot of it.
Yeah.
Right? Subsequently, it turned out that the backer wasn't exactly all they were cracked up to be. And my one client quickly became none. I had by that time none in that they disappeared. I had by that time got another couple of smaller clients, but that failure was based on some poor planning, not doing my due diligence on the investor properly, you know, schoolboy error, and not thinking, as you all do when you first start out, that big client was going to suddenly disappear into the smoke, right? They were a big North American organization, and they got all around. And I just, it didn't cross my mind that there would be a change in personnel in this organization, and the person who I was dealing with would be shown the door, and suddenly I'm left there hanging on a limb. But one of the interesting things about that failure is that I rented office space from an accountant in the little town I lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was honest with the accountant when I said, I can't pay you next month's rent. I'm going to try and keep going, but I can't pay next month's rent. Mm. And he gave me the advice, look, I think you should cease trading. I think it'd be a really good idea to cease trading. Stop before you dig a hole any bigger. So I ceased trading, got into the paperwork, got that stuff on track. And about 10 days later, the same accountant rang me and said, I've got a man in my office today who's got a real problem over dealing with Ford in Charleville in France. And I went, oh, really? Yeah. He said, yeah. I don't suppose you could come and help him, could you? I hadn't got the money for next month's mortgage. And he was offering to pay for me to go to France to talk to Ford about a product I hadn't got I hadn't got Scooby-Doo what this product did, right? And I'd never actually met anybody with Ford in Charleville, but needs must. Yeah. So I went and had an intensive 5 days training, which he paid for, on his product, and during which time I used some old contacts, 6 degrees of separation, found somebody in Charleville who was the right person to talk to, got him a car, which he tanked up the fuel for, and drove to Charleville. And the guy became a long-term client.
Oh, fantastic. Because basically, Christina's saying that it's almost, how did you use that to kind of drive you forward? But likewise, did you constantly reevaluate? And it's, did you look inwards or outwards? And my point is, it's almost that, I guess we all go through different times of struggle and failure. And it's almost, Tony Robbins talks about this in some of his books, but it's almost how you picture it, how you view it. If you see it as the positive nudge in the right direction to chase the next path, or the story that you tell yourself could be very negative, etc. But likewise, Christina, if David hasn't answered your question, please reevaluate, and I'll ask him next. But no, I appreciate the question.
Maybe I could put it in a sporting analogy.
Okay.
If you play golf to a reasonable standard, right? Probably one of your favourite clubs is hitting 7-iron. Most golfers of any aptitude can hit a 7-iron half decently. You play 100 rounds a year, and every now and then you're going to hit a really squiffy 7-iron, really squiffy. You shank it, or you pull it, or you dunch it, or whatever, right? But in 42 of those rounds, you hit 7-iron quite well. Mm-hmm. And the thing to remember when it all goes pear-shaped is you've still got the same talent. You've still got the ability. It's just that in this particular moment, in this particular sphere, that hasn't worked. Yeah, but pick your 7-iron up and go and hit it again. And this time, you won't shank it, or you won't pull it, or you won't dunch it. You'll hit it okay. But you learn one thing you do learn is you do learn some humility. Not something I was blessed with in my youth, particularly. But I have learned that over the years that the bad times do teach you some humility.
I think the bad times almost teach you that, a hell of a lot, which you then can, well, I guess some people let it defeat them. Woe is me, isn't it terrible? I've lost my job. Or you spin it, you use the chance to do something else and make the most of it. And it's, I think it's a mindset thing. But anyway, conscious of time, number 47, it shouldn't be you, as in, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, that's back to something we talked about a little earlier, and that shouldn't be you is a real story. It's about a company. It's based around a company. It's in southern Texas, and the guy invented some engineering gizmos for the oil and gas industry. Brilliant pieces of kit, just stunning. really worked, fantastic, leading edge, cutting edge, but he absolutely got himself in the bind where he thought he was the only person who could sell it.
Yeah.
Nobody else could sell it. Nobody else knew his baby the way he knew his baby. And he never was convinced. He never was convinced that he should change it. And then eventually something else changed in the company's life, and somebody, which happened to be one of his sons, emerged below him, and who really could pitch the pitch. And as he reached later in life, his son was able to move the business forward simply because he was in the right place at the right time. But no, every company in every organization, from the 2-man band, 3-man band, is it you? Should it be you, or should it be somebody else? Should it be somebody who can close the deal?
I'm with you.
It's not about the person who's, lawyers teach us an awful lot about, good lawyers, particularly defense lawyers, teach us an awful lot about closing the deal. They're never the expert in the field. What they rely on is a whole plethora of people behind them to pull all the information together, pull all the data together, pull the story together, and then they walk into the courtroom and deliver the story.
Do you know what comes next in the book? I'm just teasing you.
What number did you have?
So we had 47, and the next one is 48, closing the sale. But in particular, and you've talked about you've always felt that your talent is closing, which I think is really important. But actually, would you like to explain both what FPER is?
Fortitude, perseverance,
engagement.
Thank you. It's that ability to, first of all, you've got to have loads of fortitude if you're going to be in a sales situation. In any sales situation, no matter what you sell anywhere in the world, the world's industrial averages, you get 1 in 3. Mm-hmm. So if you bid $300,000 worth of work, you'll get $100,000 worth of work, right? And it's based around, do you have the fortitude to do it? But the most important piece is the rehearsal and the engagement, mm-hmm. right? And most people will balk at the rehearsal. Mm-hmm. Now, I talk to young people a lot these days about their presentation, and how to do it. Rehearse your stuff. Yeah. The Rolling Stones and Brian May and Roger Taylor are Queen, and people that aren't that brilliant instantly.
Yeah.
They practice. They play. Brian May probably plays Bohemian Rhapsody and We Are the Champions every single day, even if he's at home, right? Because that's what makes it brilliant. And it's that ability to rehearse, understand your lines, know how you're going to present it, and then go into that room and engage the people who are in the room.
Yeah. And to be honest, that probably comes back to the acting background. It's the ability to emotionally move people and make a connection is what makes the difference. There's nothing worse, especially nowadays with Zoom meetings, when someone starts to present and it's dull as anything and you just want to die. You lose me in 10 seconds, but actually someone that's passionate and just talks about stuff, doesn't really matter what it is. It's no, I agree with that one. Next one. So this one was interesting, and obviously you're a rugby fan, which you mentioned before, but the chapter was number 53. And it was to do with, but Dad, you're a hooker, which is obviously a rugby position, not a adult night worker. But do you want to talk about the topic and the backstory about what the story is about?
It's back to something we've covered 2 or 3 times today. It's about being the right person to do that job, right? It's about having the talent that does that job. And one of the problems you get at school kids, I've done it. We've all done it, you stand on a touchline, issuing your 7-year-old instructions on how to play football. I did it. I never played soccer. I played rugby. What am I doing standing on a touchline, issuing instructions to a 7-year-old about how to play the game? He knows more about it than I do.
Because
right?
In the book, David talks about how, say in sports, especially on a soccer team, as you called it, is that just because we've got Americans watching? For me, it's a football team, but regardless. But you have like a goalkeeping coach that all he does is teach goalkeeping because he's the specialist in that, as opposed to the manager of the team, knows the overall. But the point is that if you have a team in business, which most people do, and you're looking to teach them sales, get a sales expert to teach them sales, not just a generalist, if that makes sense. And I thought it was a really valid point. And actually, I'm going to end on number 55, which is being contrary is being smart. And this is about people getting people to argue both sides of an argument.
Yes. This is a great management tool for people, a really, really good management tool for people. If you have a decision to make in your business, which is very often a policy type decision where there are two very differing points of view, right, is get the combatants to argue each other's side of the story, right? If you're given the task of putting forward somebody else's argument which you don't necessarily agree with, it helps you understand where they're coming from, because you've got to build your presentation on the facts and information, which are things which you would like to challenge. So therefore, you learn better about what you're doing or what their position is by simply having to argue their point of view. And this comes back from doing debating societies as a kid in my high school days, is that you would often be given a subject to debate which you didn't have any political allegiance to or any real interest in, right? And so therefore you had to build the story to be able to pitch it. And so I think it's often important in business to use that tool to get people to understand each other's points of view.
Very good. One of the things which you actually asked to add into the interview, which wasn't originally there, last week or a few weeks ago, I sent you a copy of the Roadmap MBA, which is a project that I've been working on for a long time. Do you have your copy to hand? I won't judge you. If you don't.
Yes, it's right here, sir. It's right here. Let me grab it and show it to the viewers. Look, there you go. This, folks, direct to our friends who are watching, this, folks, is really good because not because Pugh wrote it, but because it's full of very practical ways of understanding your business. This, a little bit like my small handbook, this isn't a handbook, I would like to point out. This is full of practical advice from real world business about how you interpret some of the best MBA best practices in order to make your business work better. This isn't about teaching you from an academic point of view. I think it's really interesting. Somebody said to me the other day, is that most MBA students don't actually understand the M&A that they've been asked to look at, because if you study the M&A module on an MBA course, it isn't very much about practical life. And what this does is it does. It helps people through those modules to understand it. And I think the other interesting thing about this, Steve, is that people can buy into this, not even complete it, but they will pick out modules which really resonate with them in the business they're in at the moment, and that will help them do that job better. So I think this has clearly taken a lot longer to put together than my little handbook did, right? And all hats off to you for doing that. But it's a very, even I can read it because I don't stumble over lots of academic words, which I'm not very good with.
But I was always shocked at I was shocked for one that nobody had ever done it, but actually there's two sides to it. One is all about making business education accessible. And again, you can actually sign up for a free course if you can't afford one, and it's a guest list at roadmapmba.com. But likewise, in the same way, making really complicated concepts really simple, because they don't have to be complicated. And it's almost that was always one of my talents, because I am quite good at the academic stuff as well. But actually piecing things together, that's what I'm good at, is solving puzzles. And I've just in some ways applied that to what I class as small businesses that I think will help a lot of people. If you work for Coca-Cola in a very specialist job, maybe it's not for you, but actually for most people in most businesses, I think it'll help. What did you not like about it? Anything? Actually, yes, you thought there was too much stuff in the packs.
Yeah, I think from a just I'll repeat because what I said to you at the time. I just think this when you open it, there's too much loose material in the pack. Put it all. Either it needs to be in the front of the book as a something that's actually in the front of the book as a what do you call it, a prelude to the book, right? As a prelude to the book, or just simply in a leaflet which contains all that information which people can read on a separate case.
But what's quite funny, and because when I've done different interviews with different people, like when we had the first call, I wrote it down, and I'm already working on the next iteration, and I've made the change already. But that's what businesses should do. It's not like, oh, this is my baby. It's get feedback, learn, iterate, and it's just. But again, with someone with a lot of experience that has been there and done it, it's really important for me to kind of make sure that I tick that box. And it's valuable. So I appreciate your time. Just before, because we've been going for just over an hour now, the two questions which I know I prepped you about, and I ask all of my guests, and I recap this. It's got its own section on YouTube, and I'll actually repost this in about 6 months' time. Right. But in some ways, this is almost the most valuable bit. And it's just a way to impart knowledge and share, and actually just share some of your years of experience that might help other people. Would you be happy to share what's the best piece of advice you've ever had?
Oh, yes, happily. Best piece of advice I had it twice in my life. The first time I was probably 15, and I had a drama teacher in school, funnily enough, named Francis Bacon. No, he wasn't the Irish painter, but his name was Francis Bacon, a brilliant English literature teacher and a drama teacher. And he used to say, when getting people to understand their lines and responses to lines, listen as well as you hear. Listen as well as you hear. We all hear, but are you listening? And the man, just before I went to kick off Pathfinder Team Consulting, so in the late 80s, back to the music connections, a band called Mike and the Mechanics, which was Rutherford's band, released a fabulous single which shot to #1 in the United States. It's called In the Living Years. And it's about the conflict between father and son, etc., etc.
I know it.
But Mike repeats the same line. Listen as well as you hear. It's no good hearing really well what people say to you. You need to listen to what they've said to you. And that was just before I launched into Pathfinder. And it taught me, it reminded me of Francis Bacon back in high school. And it was something I took into Pathfinder Team Consulting and would say to people on the team, as well as to myself, right? Listen. And listen as well as you hear. You're going to, if you hear what people are saying to you, and you take it in by listening properly, when you do speak, you'll have something to add to the conversation. Too many people hear, but they're not listening. And so what they're hearing is they're waiting for a chance for you to stop talking so they can tell you what they were going to tell you already.
My wife's mum does that, but don't tell her, she won't watch this.
So listen as well as you hear. It's the best piece of advice I was ever given.
But I think what's interesting is just the way that you've actually embodied that over time is that in the same way I created the roadmap was actually listening to lots of advice over a long time, bringing it together into one place. You did in the book as well, that you listened and you took all this experience, but actually you've put it down now into something that people can buy. But that almost proves someone that is receiving all the time. And I think almost it happens with age as well, that when you have the confidence to sit back and listen and and pick your moments to attack kind of thing, as opposed to and I was probably guilty of it when I was younger as well, always wanting to stand up and be the one talking and talk much, because almost you think that if you talk the loudest and the quickest you'll win the argument, and that's not the case. If you were to give advice to your younger self, and you can pick any age, the guy at school, whoever, what would it be?
Remember in life that dreams don't come with a price list.
Do you want to expand on it a little bit?
Well, yeah, one of the problems I had in my 20s and 30s was I still had dreams, but they always seemed to have a price to them.
Got you.
And it's to act out your dream, to live your dream, to be the best. I know these are all cliches, but to be the best that you can be, right? It's not the price, it's the dream. Make sure that you keep hold of that dream and take it forward. I had the idea for part-time team consulting in the mid-80s. I wrote it down on one piece of little yellow legal pad, A4. It's still up upstairs in the loft, right? Which summarized what I wanted to do. And that became the dream. But it always seemed to have a price.
Okay.
And then something happened in my life that provided a small amount of capital. I had a very supportive wife and an opportunity to live the dream, at which point there was no price. It was do the dream. And that's what I would tell my younger self. Be cognizant of the fact that the dreams don't have a price. Let's just get on with it.
Very deep, very deep. And before we wrap up, because we're now on 11 minutes past 5,
okay.
Is there anything you would like to talk about or plug before we go?
No, it's been a pleasure talking to you as always, Steve.
You big charmer.
We've had lots of conversations over the years, and they've always been longer than they were probably intended to be. But no, it's been a pleasure.
We can't shut you up. That's
Sorry?
I said it's because we can't shut you up.
No, I think it's I'm just talking about this and helping people. It's about trying to help people. If one person, and this is something which I really, really believe in at the moment, and certainly this time in my life, if there's one person out there who sees or hears something we've said today and it resonates with them and it helps them to advance them and their business to a better place, job done.
I think we might have found that person from the comments, but I won't leave it with that. David, thank you for your time. Genuinely really good book for £7 or £8 on Amazon. It was sometimes you buy things and they're not very good. And actually I read a lot of books, and if they're rubbish, I don't tend to review them just because I don't want anyone to think. But I was really impressed. And likewise, I think there's a lot of really practical stuff, which one of the things that I find, it's having the reference. So this will now sit on my bookshelf with, the other better books I've got. And then at some point, you'll have, I'm going to go back to that and you'll see it with fresh eyes. And I think it's almost when, hopefully things that have value, especially when you kind of know the person that was involved, it's, that's what the journey that we're all on in our lives and businesses and careers is, just to learn and adapt and that kind of thing. And for someone that's worked in 64 different countries and has been around a little bit, some highs, some lows, but actually been through it, the fact that I probably have 40 years left until I get to your point. But what's really exciting is actually I don't know what my journey is going to be in the next 40 years, if that makes sense. But that's the fun of it. And it's, so likewise, some of your contacts and friends in America, I can't wait to travel again, just when COVID's all kind of gone, and maybe meet some of them. And that's kind of the beauty of this. So David, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to end the stream now. I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. And thank you for your time. And thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
No worries. Cheers, David. Bye-bye.
Cheers.